welcome to the Flash Focus Hall of Fame position tier list breakdown. Today we're going to talk about Hall of Fame catchers and say where they rank in the tier list. I'm Deej, this is my brother Smokey. How are you, Smoke?
Doing well. How about you, Deej?
Doing pretty good. All right, so on the left here we've got every Hall of Fame catcher, and it's in alphabetical order. I don't want to just go descending by WAR because that can make it tougher to, figure out the little nuances. So let's start out with Johnny Bench. I would say Bench is the consensus GOAT, greatest of all time catcher. He's just the best at everything. 2 MVPs, Rookie of the Year, 14 All-Star games, 10 Gold Gloves, 2 rings, World Series MVP. He was just great at everything. He could hold 12 baseballs in his hand. I don't know. To me, Johnny Bench is a very, very obvious S tier catcher. Do you feel any differently, Smokey?
No, he is. He's a great person. He's a surefire Hall of Famer. I put him right in that category.
Yeah. So the thing with catchers is they only play about 80% as much as everybody else. So Bench only has 75 WAR, which is like, there's like guys that you're not sure they belong in the Hall of Fame at 75 WAR. Like Lou Whitaker's about 75, and people are like, I don't know. So you can mentally add, I don't know, 10, maybe even 20 WAR to catchers totals to kind of get an idea of where they really rank historically. So yeah, don't be fooled by only 75 WAR. Bench is he's the best. All right.
I agree.
Yeah, he's just no doubt about it, and it's kind of a big gap after him. All right, next is Yogi Berra. Yogi Berra might be the most famous catcher. I feel like non-baseball fans have all heard of him. We got 3 MVPs, 18 All-Star games. He's got 10 World Series rings. He's got about 60 WAR. He had just a consistently excellent career, a very famous guy. To me, I think Bench is the only S tier catcher. To me, the S tier is just the hall within a hall. But I see Yogi as an A tier catcher. I'm not really sure how I would rate him any lower than that. What do you think about Yogi?
I feel like if you put him in the S tier, I'd agree with you. With the 3 MVPs, multiple World Series rings, and he handled those pitching staffs in those World Series. I mean, he played on some great teams. He definitely benefited from that. But he also put up the numbers. I mean, if you said S tier, I'd agree with you. If you said A tier, I agree too. I mean, the WAR is not quite there. He probably did benefit from being on some really good teams, but he's funny and he's likable, and I'd agree with you either way, A or S tier.
Yeah, he was also really involved in baseball like his whole life, and I think I'm convinced. I can put him in S tier. I think he's up there. No harm in that. All right. So next up is Roger Bresnahan. So Bresnahan was an 1800s guy. 126 OPS plus. That's good. He only had 1,200 hits. 42 WAR. He got that ring in '05. We all remember that. He's from Ohio. Gets a little recognition there because we're Guardians fans. The only thing I can tell you about Roger Bresnahan was, do you remember the infamous potato play where a catcher threw a potato into left field and was waiting at home plate with the real ball and tagged the guy out, and then he got like banned for life? That guy was.
Yeah.
That was Dave Bresnahan, Roger's grandson or great grandson or something. Anyway, yeah, I don't know what to do with some of these old school guys. He was a dead baller, so you're not going to see any home runs or anything from him. So it's not really fair to ding him for only having 26 homers. But like 1,200 hits, I mean, they were playing 150 games back then, so that's really low. 42 WAR is quite good for, a dead ball catcher. It's probably the equivalent of 55 to 60 WAR if you played a different position, which is, fringe Hall of Fame. Certainly not an F tier, but I don't consider Bresnahan really like one of the guys that was, need to know about. I don't know. What do you look at with Bresnahan? To me, he's a D or an E. I could go either way. What do you think about Bresnahan?
I have him a little higher.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that, among his peers, he played really well. And, yes, they played less games back then. So having less hits makes sense. I feel like he's probably a B or a C. When you look at his peers, he's probably, it probably looked a lot better. It's hard to tell. We grew up in, in the 90s and the 2000s, and he's just not, he doesn't have the numbers that we're so used to seeing from a Hall of Famer. But I think he's probably a B or C.
All right. Yeah, I don't see him as that good, but I'll compromise and I'll give him a C. So just as a reminder, S is, Hall within a Hall, like greatest of the great. And then A, B, C, D, E is kind of like a 5-point scale for Hall of Famer. So C is an average Hall of Famer. D is below average. E is really have to convince me that he even belongs in the Hall. And F is a kick this guy out. He doesn't belong. B, above average Hall of Famer. A, just below S tier. Maybe not quite the, inner core, just greatest of the greatest, but certainly a tier just below that. So at C, we've got Roger Bresnahan as an average Hall of Famer. All right, next up is Roy Campanella. So a bit of a tragic case. Roy Campanella was he was half Italian and half black, so he had to begin his career in the Negro Leagues, and he was not able to make his MLB debut until he was 26. And then when he was 35, he got in a horrible car accident and was paralyzed. So Roy Campanella had a short career, but it was a combination of the color barrier and a tragic injury. So I would say you can really throw this guy a bone and give him the benefit of the doubt on his short career. So when you look at the seasons he had in the Negro Leagues, in 1945, he was, one of the best. He led in WAR. Now, one thing about Negro League stats, they are very incomplete. They were playing way over 100 games a year, and he's listed as leading the league with 56 games. So they weren't actually playing this few games. This is just what they had records for. So there's a little bit of wiggle room in how you interpret these guys. All I can really do is look at their stat sheet and kind of see what kind of black ink they have, like how often they're leading the league and things. So he did have a batting title. He hit 388 in 1944, and in 45 he was arguably the MVP. He had 3 All-Star games in the Negro Leagues. And by the time he made the majors, he had 3 MVPs. He had probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 4+ WAR seasons, which I consider for a catcher Hall of Fame caliber. And again, he played before the 162 game schedule, and he was a catcher, so he's just getting a lot less playing time. So Hall of Fame, definitely very deserving Hall of Fame. Average at worst. I see Campanella as a B or a C tier Hall of Famer. The 3 MVPs though, that is very impressive. And made 11 All-Star games. He was on that 55 Dodgers team that finally beat the Yankees. Yeah, three MVPs and a possible Negro League MVP there in that year he led in WAR. 4-time potential MVP. Yeah, I'm thinking A tier. I don't think I would put him in the S tier because he's just doesn't have that, star power of Johnny Bench or Yogi Berra, but I'm comfortable putting him as an A tier. What do you think about Campanella?
I think he's definitely an A tier.
Yeah.
The one thing that I really want to give him credit for is that he was part of the group of people that broke the color barrier.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like, that's hard to do. I mean, that's an additional, you know, credit to what you're doing. If you told me A tier, I would never argue with you. With the multiple MVPs and what he did before he was able to actually play in the majors and the Negro League, he may. If you told me I want to put this guy in the S tier, I wouldn't fight you on it. But I definitely agree with A tier.
Yeah, it's I agree with that. I'll leave him in A tier because there's only I think 19 of these guys, and if we have 3 or 4 of them in the S tier, that's kind of pushing it. But he's certainly an all-time great. All right, next up is Gary Carter. So Gary Carter was the Expos and Mets catcher in the 70s and 80s. He no MVPs, although he finished second and third. He's got a bunch of All-Stars, finished second in the Rookie of the Year. So 11 All-Star games. He was on the 86 Mets, 3 Gold Gloves, 2 All-Star MVPs. I definitely don't consider him an A or an S, but he was definitely one of the, a top half Hall of Fame catcher for sure. I believe he took several tries to get in the Hall. I don't think he got in on his first 1 or 2 tries. 2,000 hits, 300 homers. Yeah, to me, Gary Carter feels like a very solid B tier Hall of Fame catcher, all things considered. What do you think about Carter?
Yeah, I've got him in the B C tier.
Yeah.
Like you said, he never won an MVP. He was never an above average hitter. He's good. He was really good, and he had longevity. If you wanted to pound the table for a B, I agree with you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, B feels about right. All right. Next up, we got Mickey Cochrane. So Mickey Cochrane was the Tigers and Philly A's catcher in the 20s and 30s. So mostly played in the live ball era. 119 homers, 1,600 hits, 135 or 129 OPS plus. My bad, which is excellent for a catcher. Certainly right up there. 2 MVPs, 3 World Series rings, 50 WAR. I will say this: Mickey Cochrane was Mickey Mantle's dad named him after Mickey Cochrane. Now, he didn't know that Mickey's real name was Gordon, which I think worked out pretty well for Mickey Mantle. But Mickey Cochrane was the GOAT catcher in the first 80 years or so of MLB. He was definitely the man. Until guys like Johnny Bench came along, he was probably of course, he's the greatest catcher of all time. He did have a shorter career. Again, he was playing on a shorter schedule as a catcher. But 1,600 hits. That's just on the weaker side. He's got he led the league once in on base percentage, and he had a 420 career on base, which is amazing. So I'm pretty comfortable putting Mickey Cochrane as A tier. I don't think he's S tier. He might have been at one point, but I would say he is not anymore. But I think that his legacy as a one-time S tier player can't really rank him anywhere but A tier. I don't know, any thoughts on Mickey Cochrane?
Yeah, I think A or B tier, pretty good. The 50 WAR is impressive, but it was the live ball era, so they did play less games than the current players. But I think that's about right.
Yeah. Okay. So next up we got Bill Dickey. Bill Dickey was the Yankees catcher, I believe a lifer Yankee. Yes, lifer Yankee. So he was the catcher for those, great teams in the 30s. Not really an offensive juggernaut. He didn't lead the league in much of anything. Oh, he did lead in intentional walks one year. But again, he's a catcher, so they're not likely to lead in, counting stats unless something crazy happens. And he did miss 2 years in World War II after having an excellent season in 1943. So you could maybe give him a little bump up. He had 1,900 hits. Maybe consider him a 2,200 hit guy. Or maybe not quite that much looking at how many hits he had. But, he's a 2,000 hit guy for sure. 200 homers, which was, off the top of my head, that might have been the most for a catcher ever at the point he retired. Certainly very close. So 56 WAR, 11 All Stars, eight rings. He was on the great Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig teams. Several 4, 5, 6 WAR seasons in there. This feels like another A-tier catcher to me. This is a very good career for a catcher. Any thoughts on Bill Dickey?
Yeah, I think he's A-tier.
Yeah.
I think he's, part of that really good Yankees era. I wouldn't fight you on that at all.
Yeah. All right. Well, so we are going alphabetically, but I think we're, for whatever reason, it's kind of front-loaded alphabetically in terms of how great these guys are. All right, Buck Ewing. This is the first guy I don't know much about. I don't have any fun facts on Buck Ewing. So Buck Ewing was on the Troy Trojans, New York Giants, Cleveland Spiders, and Reds there in the 1800s. He's got a home run title and a triples title, which is pretty cool. 129 OPS plus, excellent for a catcher. 1,600 hits, 2 ring. Well, they didn't really have the real World Series back then. Yeah, it's a little harder to evaluate these, 1800s guys. When did he make the Hall of Fame? He's inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1939. So he was inducted pretty early on. He wasn't one of those, Veterans Committee guys who made it in when he was, 115 years old. So it looks like the people who knew what they were talking about considered Buck Ewing to be one of the greatest catchers of the 19th century. I don't know what to say about Buck Ewing. All we can do is kind of go with what everybody thought. The fact I never heard of him means he's probably not, a all-time inner ring guy or anything. I don't know, maybe B tier? I don't know. Any thoughts on Buck Ewing?
Not really. I mean, yeah. I've heard the name. I've seen the plaque in Cooperstown. I'll go with B. I agree.
All right, yeah, just don't really know much better than what others have told us. Let's clean up these tabs a little bit. All right, next up we have Rick Farrell. Rick Farrell is, when you look at a list of Hall of Famers who shouldn't be Hall of Famers, this dude is always on that list. So Rick Farrell was kind of a journeyman. He played with the St. Louis Browns, Washington Senators, and Red Sox. Kind of looks like he went back and forth between the teams several times. He did have a 378 on base percentage, but only a 95, sub-average OPS plus. WAR, only 31 WAR. 7-time All-Star. Let's see. Must have been a glove first guy, or field. Yeah, he was an above average defensive catcher based on, these stats, which aren't great at capturing catcher defense and aren't great at capturing defense from 100 years ago. So take that with a grain of salt if you'd like. I come preloaded with a prejudice that Rick Farrell is one of the bad Hall of Fame picks. He made it in 1984, about, way after he retired. I don't know. This guy does 31 WAR. I mean, WAR isn't everything. Catchers don't get as much WAR as everybody else, but 31, that's not a Hall of Famer to me. I kind of want to put him as an F tier. I don't know. Are you willing to stand up for Rick Farrell and argue him up above F tier?
No, I don't have anything.
Yeah, sorry, Rick. I wouldn't have put you in the Hall of Fame based on what I know, which isn't much. All right, next up is Carlton Fisk. So Fisk was the Red Sox and White Sox catcher for a very long time. He had a 24-year career, 69 WAR. No black ink, which is not a big deal for catchers. 117 OPS plus, which is very good for a catcher. He was definitely regarded as one of the greatest catchers. He had the famous, wave the the home run fair in the 75 World Series. He led the league in triples in his rookie year. Wow. And he won the Rookie of the Year. So, yeah, he's got a couple 7 WAR seasons, which is very impressive for a catcher. So 11 All-Star games, a Gold Glove. When I see 1 Gold Glove, I'm kind of like, 1 Gold Glove is, if you don't have a bunch, you maybe just won in a weird year where there wasn't really much competition. But so he was definitely regarded as one of the best offensive catchers and was at least considered a good enough defensive catcher to get a Gold Glove. So, he certainly wasn't a bad defensive catcher. So Fisk is definitely in the upper half of Hall of Famers. To me, it's just, is he A, B, or C tier Hall of Famer? I consider him very comparable to Gary Carter. To me, he's a very solid B tier Hall of Fame catcher. Do you feel differently?
I don't. I was going to say the exact same thing. I was going to say he overlapped with Gary Carter. If there were 2 really good offensive catchers, those are the 2 that I would name in the 80s.
Yeah. All right. So, very good career, very deserving Hall of Famer is he. All right, next up is Josh Gibson. So, Gibson they called him the Black Babe Ruth. He was the Negro League catcher. He died at 35. They say he hit over 800 home runs. And now, obviously, Negro League statistics don't have anything close to full data coverage, but just look at this. Everything is bold. This guy was unbelievable. He led the league in WAR, 10 times. Just with consistently, look at all those homers. Just look at all that everything. When you talk to people who know Negro Leagues, they say that there's basically 3 S-tier Negro Leaguers, undoubtedly. It's Satchel Paige, Oscar Charleston, and Josh Gibson. So to me, Josh Gibson is definitely S-tier. When we talk about the GOAT, he might be above Johnny Bench. I don't know. Any reason to put Josh Gibson anywhere but S-tier?
No. I mean, I cannot even possibly imagine a catcher hitting like that in the majors. I mean, that would just blow my mind. I'd have to imagine it would be like a 120 WAR or something like that if he was able to play in the majors. S-tier all the way.
Yeah, and if you look at his 162 game average, he averaged 10 WAR per 162 games. And even if record keeping for Negro Leagues is wonky, it's not that wonky. He wouldn't accidentally get 10. That's like Willie Mays, Babe Ruth caliber. Mike Trout, just like the inner ring of the inner ring. So, yeah, so definitely an S-tier catcher is Josh Gibson. All right, next up is Gabby Hartnett. So Gabby played mostly in the 20s and 30s for the Cubs. He was almost a Cubs lifer, except he played this one season for the Giants. Probably shouldn't have done that, Gabby. All right, so Gabby was a 126 OPS plus, 1,900 hits, 230 dingers. Those were very good numbers for a catcher back then. 56 WAR, man, that's, add 20 to that or even 15 and he's in the 70s. So this guy he feels like an average Hall of Famer to me. I think he's got 1 MVP, 6 All-Star games, very long, very successful career with some good totals and also pretty good rate stats. You're not seeing any black ink, so he wasn't a holy cow offensive force, but this guy feels like a very strong C tier Hall of Famer to me. Thoughts on Gabby Hartnett?
I'd go B or C. That OPS plus is pretty impressive. And a cool fact about him, he was the one that was catching for the Cubs when Babe Ruth did the famous point. So he was the closest guy to it. That's kind of a fun fact about him. But at DC, I wouldn't argue with you on either. He belongs. You'd like to see more records for a catcher, showing they're above average. But I wouldn't argue with either. If you want to put him at C, I'll go with it.
All right, yeah, feels about right. Okay, next up we got Ernie Lombardi, aka Schnoz. Look at that Schnoz, Ernie. All right, Ernie Lombardi, 38 WAR, not very impressive. I played in the 30s and 40s, mostly for the Reds, a little Giants action there at the end. He did win 2 batting titles, which was a huge deal back then. Less of a big deal now, but certainly very impressive. He was a very good hitting catcher, and he hit, 330 several times. So certainly an excellent hitting catcher. He's got an MVP, 7 All-Star games, got that ring in 40 for the Reds. Let's see what his other things. He's not considered, not rated as a very good catcher, is marginally below average. I don't know. This guy's. I think there weren't too many catchers back then. He won 2 batting titles, so he was, considered a great player during his career, which he was. Won an MVP that year. Yeah, I'm just seeing kind of a very short, modest peak for this guy. I don't mind him as a Hall of Famer, but to me, he's a D or an E Hall of Famer. I don't know. I'll stick him at D. I think he's got the 2 batting titles and the great nickname, but I don't know. Tough to rate him any higher than that. What do you think about old Schnoz?
I think a C or a D. I mean, I think you want to see a longer period of eliteness.
Yeah.
For a Hall of Famer, he wasn't elite for a long time, just a short blip. So C or D. I wouldn't argue too strongly for either.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, let's leave him in D. We don't have any yet, and we're kind of getting close to the end here. All right, next up is Biz Mackey. So Biz Mackey was a Negro Leaguer. I have heard the name, possibly because of the 80s hip-hop guy Biz Markie, who sang Just a Friend. Go listen to that if you've never heard it. It's a classic. All right, so, all we can really do is just kind of look at their stats, look how much ink is bold, kind of see where they stood among their peers. So he had this one amazing season in 23. He was also great the next year. So, you kind of look at this, 3 WAR is enough to lead the league, and he had, 1, 2, 3. So I'm seeing like 7 really good seasons as a catcher, which is very impressive. Certainly Hall of Fame worthy. Now, again, I don't know anything about him other than he has a cool name. So I pulled up this little bio on the Hall of Fame. So when the great Negro League catchers are listed, Mackey's name should always reside next to Josh Gibson and Roy Campanella. Mackey was a pitcher's dream with his ability to receive, call the game, throw out base runners with his rifle arm, and he was plenty gifted as a hitter too. Mackey taught Campanella the nuances of catching in the 30s, and the future Dodgers legend would pay homage to his mentor in his 1959 farewell speech. All right, so Mackey was a defense-first catcher who was also a good hitter, which he was. He won a batting title and an everything title in that one year. So, I don't know, who's a very good defensive catcher that was also a good, not great hitter who had a peak? I don't know. Nobody really even comes to mind. I don't know. I mean,
not really. They don't get in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, it's tough to know what to do with Biz Mackey. I don't know. I'll just stick him as a C. That feels pretty fair. He's, they said that he was not considered up there with, the likes of Campanella and Gibson, so we should rank him lower. I've heard of him because I'm a baseball geek, but I don't know anything about him. So it kind of lacks the fame part of Hall of Fame. But he certainly is deserving. 25 WAR on, for a Negro League baseball reference page is definitely a lot. So, I don't know. I have no frame of reference, so I'll just put him at average Hall of Famer. Do you feel differently?
No.
Okay. All right. Next we have Joe Mauer. Joe Mauer is, I believe, the youngest Hall of Famer. He was born in 1983. One of the greatest hitting catchers ever, 55 WAR. He has 3 batting titles, so take that, Ernie Schnoz Lombardi. He won the MVP that year in '09. He made it in on his first try, and no one had any problem with that. To me, I had a little internal debate as to where he stood as a Hall of Famer. I don't consider him an all-time great. He's not up there with Bench or Gibson or Campy or, Bear or any of those guys. He is well below that. But he did get it on his first try. He was an excellent hitting catcher. 124 OPS plus. 2,100 hits. Not much of a power hitter. And he did spend the last third of his career or so as a first baseman, where he was hitting, 5-10 homers a year and, hitting, league average OPS. So he did have a very strong peak, but then he kind of had a weak ending to his career, and he only played till he was 35. I don't know. He feels kind of like C or maybe even D tier to me. Where do you think he stands?
I think he's a B tier.
You have him at B?
He was definitely one of the best catchers of his generation.
Sure.
Never any insinuation of steroids. Just a very good hitter. I think he's a solid B.
All right, give him his B. I'm a little more sour on him. I have him kind of like C, low C. Let's just compromise on C. I think that's fine. Average Hall of Famer. No shame in that. All right, next up is Mike Piazza. Mike Piazza is probably one of the three best hitting catchers. Certainly, I believe he has the most home runs of not counting Josh Gibson, of course. 427 homers. I believe that is by far the most by a primary catcher. Like 50 above Johnny Bench. I don't think he won an MVP. I know MVPs, but man, he won the Rookie of the Year, and he was, top 6 MVP, 8 or 9 times. He had a reputation as a subpar defensive catcher, but he was such a good hitter. Who cares? I consider him, he's a bit of a defensive butcher, but such a great hitter that he's like, he's an A tier to me. I don't know. Do you feel differently about Mike Piazza?
It depends on how you feel about the steroid era.
Yeah, sure.
Did he do steroids? I don't know.
Yeah.
I would lean towards he probably did. I don't think there's any documentation out there that he definitely did steroids.
There isn't.
Yeah, I mean...
There's whispers.
I think he's a B.
B? Yeah, I mean, God, but he's just 400 home runs as a catcher, and gosh, 143 OPS plus with 2 OPS plus titles. Yeah, I'll push back as an A tier. I think he's just arguably the greatest hitting catcher ever. But certainly whispers of PEDs, and if new things come to light, who knows? But yeah, I have trouble rating him anything below A. But I get the argument for sure. All right, next up, Ivan Rodriguez, Irod, another maybe did steroids guy, but there's no evidence. Irod, I believe, has the most hits of any catcher, 2,800. He was definitely regarded as a future Hall of Famer all throughout his career. Won that MVP in '99. Tons of All-Star games, tons of Gold Gloves. What's his OPS plus? 106. Oh, he only had a 334 on base percentage. I think that's the lowest of any Hall of Fame catcher, which is weird because he's considered one of the greatest hitters. He had 300 homers and hit 35 one year. Certainly regarded at, how many Gold Gloves did he have? 13, yeah. So what we're talking here is, elite defensive catcher who was also a really good hitter, but OPS plus didn't like him very much because he played in the steroid 90s mostly, and he didn't get on base. But I don't really care about that much. He was such a great catcher. But the PED whispers might make some people think otherwise. What do you think about Irod? I have him as an A tier, maybe a B tier.
Same feeling as with Piazza. I feel like he would. I mean, I watched him earlier in his career with Texas. I watched him live, and then I watched him come to Cleveland again with Detroit towards the end of his career. He was probably 165 pounds, dripping wet.
Yeah, he was very thin.
Before he was in the 220s. To me, that's very obvious that he was on roids. But again, never been busted. I would put him in the B tier. He was definitely a force in the steroid era. Gotta.
Yeah, he's definitely an A-B straddler. Hey, you know what? This is our video. Let's just put him on the border and leave him there. What are you gonna do about it? Okay, next up is Ray Schalk. Ray Schalk is also often mentioned as a Hall of Famer that should not be in the Hall of Fame. 33 WAR, only 1,300 hits, 253 batting average. What's his on base? 340. 83 OPS plus. Gosh. Man, he was... Well, they loved his glove. All right, I mean, Schalk, again, I wasn't there. I don't remember him. He was on the White Sox. Another guy who was almost a lifer, and then he had one stupid, pointless final season with the Giants. Wow. Hey, stop doing that. Just be a lifer. Be like Joey Votto and be a lifer. Don't do that final season with the Blue Jays. All right, yeah, I don't know. Like, if you tell me that Schalk was the greatest defensive catcher of all time, he's the Ozzie Smith of catchers or whatever, yeah, there's maybe a narrative for that, but, oh God, he's such a terrible hitter. I don't know. I'll put him at E tier because I think I can be convinced that the all-time greatest defensive player at a position has a spot, but I don't know. Do you see him as an E or an F, or what do you think of Ray Schalk?
That's about right.
Yeah.
It's one of those, it has more to do with the era than it has to do with the ability.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, he doesn't belong. But whatever. If the Veterans Committee say this guy was the guy that everybody needs to remember, then okay, fine. I wasn't there. All I can do is believe you. All right, last and certainly not least is Ted Simmons. So Ted Simmons was an excellent hitting catcher in the 70s. He was on the Cardinals. He was on the Brewers. He was on the Brewers for their 82 team. Any Cardinal's going to have a terrific career and be very popular and make a lot of playoff games. He was on that when he was a rookie. He was on that 68 Cardinals team. All right, so we got 2,500 hits almost. I believe that's second to Irod for most by a catcher. 118 OPS plus, very good. He was a below average fielder, not awful. Made 8 All-Star games. Took a while to get the Hall of Fame. He retired in '88, and he just got in a couple years ago. He's one of these guys that when you're looking at best players not in the Hall of Fame, he jumps out at you. 50 WAR from the catcher with 2,500 hits. That jumps out. I don't remember him as being considered a future Hall of Famer. Where we kind of remember the tail end of his career. I think we had some of his cards, in 87, 88 when he was on the Braves. He's one of those cards where, it was like they had to use really small print because his career was so long, and you're like, oh, wow, he must have been great. He definitely had, 5 or 6, let me sort by WAR here. 1, 2, 3, yeah, 7 or 8 seasons over 4 WAR, which is excellent for a catcher. Yeah, he feels like a C tier catcher to me. Very deserving Hall of Famer, but not distinctive enough to be rated higher or lower. What do you think of Ted Simmons? Anything above or below C?
Well, the big thing about Ted Simmons is and I've read this several times, he played at the same time as Johnny Bench.
Yeah.
So if Johnny Bench, wasn't as good as he was, Ted Simmons would have been the catcher of the era. And, Steve here feels about right because, there's a surefire Hall of Famer above him. He's really good and he played for a long time and he put the numbers up. 2,500 hits is really good. So, yeah, I agree with Steve here.
All right, yeah. He was contemporaries also with Gary Carter and Carlton Fisk. But, definitely a guy that deserves the Hall of Fame. Just not an inner ring great or anything. All right, well, that wraps it up for our Hall of Fame catcher tier list. What do you think of our list? Did we get anything way off? Tell us in the comments. Throw us a like, subscribe, all that good stuff. We'd really appreciate it. And keep your eyes peeled for the next position in our Hall of Fame tier list series. Any final words, Smokey?
No. Have a good day.
All right, thanks, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.